Clara's knees hit the frozen ground. Her twins screamed against her chest as Jeremiah Cobb's words echoed across the town square. "I ordered a wife, not a woman, carrying another man's mistakes." She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. 6 weeks of travel, every penny gone, and now this man stood over her while the whole town watched, and not one soul moved to help. Samuel wailed. Rose shrieked. Clara's arms shook from cold and exhaustion and the weight of everything she'd lost. Then boots crunched through snow. A rough hand extended toward her. "Ma'am, let me help you up." If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Clara's story reaches. Now let's begin. The freight wagon had been Clara's coffin for 6 weeks. She'd buried herself in the back with her twins nursing them through frozen nights, rationing stale bread, counting the miles like a prisoner counts days. William had been dead 7 months now. The debts had taken the house, the furniture, her wedding ring. Everything except these 2 babies and the letter from a stranger promising salvation. Jeremiah Cobb, cattle merchant. Dusty Creek, Wyoming territory. Seeking capable woman for partnership, comfortable home, honest work. Clara had written back the same day she'd sold her mother's china. She'd explained everything. Widow, twins, desperate but willing to work. He'd responded within the week. "Come west, we'll make arrangements." She'd read those 4 words 100 times during the journey, held them like a prayer. Let them carry her across 1,000 miles of nothing. Now she stood in the town square with snow soaking through her boots and those 4 words turning to ash in her mouth. "You wrote about children." Jeremiah's voice carried across the square. 40 years old, iron gray hair, a wool coat that cost more than everything Clara owned. "You didn't mention there were 2 of them." "I did mention." "You didn't mention they'd be this young." He stepped back like she carried plague. Like they'd need constant care. Like they'd be a burden on any household foolish enough to take them in. Clara's arms tightened around her babies. "Mr. Cobb, please. I explained my situation clearly in my letters. My husband died before you could trap him properly." Jeremiah's lip curled. "Or after he realized what he'd gotten himself into." Someone in the crowd laughed, a woman's voice high and cruel. Clara felt heat flood her face. "My husband loved me. He died in a railroad accident. He left you with nothing." Jeremiah spread his hands, playing to the audience now. "No money, no family, no prospects. Just 2 squalling infants and a desperate need for someone else to solve your problems." "That's not... I advertised for a wife." His voice rose, making sure everyone heard. "A partner. A woman who could help build something. Not a charity case. Not a burden." He looked her up and down with open disgust. "Not damaged goods." The words hit like fists. Clara's legs buckled. She went down hard knees, cracking against frozen ground, barely managing to keep the twins from hitting the dirt. Samuel screamed. Rose wailed. And Clara knelt in the snow while the town of Dusty Creek watched and did nothing. "Please." The words scraped out of her throat. "I have nowhere else. I sold everything. That's not my concern." Jeremiah straightened his coat. "I suggest you find another wagon heading east, Mrs. Mercer. Dusty Creek doesn't need another mouth to feed." He turned his back and walked away. Clara knelt in the snow, her babies screaming, her body shaking, and watched him go. Around her, faces turned away one by one. The entertainment was over. The stranger's humiliation complete. She tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. The cold had seeped through her thin dress, through her skin, into her bones. Her fingers had gone numb where they gripped the babies. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. "Get up." She whispered it to herself. "Get up, get up, get up." Her body refused. Samuel's cries grew weaker. Exhaustion, maybe. Or cold. Clara didn't know which was worse. She pulled him tighter against her chest, trying to share what little warmth she had left. Please. She didn't know who she was talking to. God, maybe. The uncaring sky. The frozen ground. Please. Not my children. Take me if you want, but not... Ma'am. The voice came from above her. Low. Rough. Quiet in a way that cut through the baby's cries. Clara looked up. A man stood over her. Tall and lean, maybe 35, in a sheepskin coat, worn soft with years of use, dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days, and eyes brown, deep-set, tired, that held something she hadn't seen in months. Kindness. Let me help you up. He extended his hand. Clara stared at it. Calloused palm, strong fingers, a working man's hand. I don't... Her voice cracked. I don't have anything to pay you with. Didn't ask for payment. He kept his hand extended, steady, patient. Asked if I could help you up. Clara reached out. Her frozen fingers closed around his palm. He pulled her to her feet like she weighed nothing, one hand gripping hers, the other hovering near her elbow in case she stumbled. Jacob Thornton. He released her hand the moment she was stable. My mother runs the boarding house across the way. Warm rooms, hot food. He glanced at the twins, still crying but quieter now. Those young'uns need to get inside. I told you I can't pay. And I told you I ain't asking. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain old and deep. Ma'am, I know what it looks like when someone's run out of options. Seen it in the mirror often enough. Clara's throat tightened. Why are you helping me? Everyone else? Everyone else ain't me. He picked up her traveling bag from where it had fallen in the snow. You coming or not? 'Cause those babies are turning blue, and I'd rather not explain to my mother why I let an infant freeze to death 20 feet from her front door. Clara looked at the boarding house. Smoke rising from the chimney. Lamplight glowing in the windows. Warmth she could almost feel from here. Then she looked at Jacob Thornton. This stranger with tired eyes and work-rough hands who'd stopped when everyone else walked away. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He started walking. You ain't met my mother. Ruth Thornton was a force of nature in a flour-dusted apron. She took one look at Clara stumbling through the door with screaming babies and frozen limbs, and her face went hard as stone. Jacob Thornton, what in God's name happened to this woman? Jeremiah Cobb happened. Jacob set down the traveling bag. His mail-order bride. He took one look at the twins and said damaged goods right there in the square. Ruth's voice could have frozen fire. I heard. Half the town heard. That snake made sure of it. She crossed the room in 3 strides and took Clara's arm. Her grip was firm, almost fierce, but her hands were warm. Sit, now, before you fall down. Clara sat, or rather her legs gave out, and the chair caught her. The warmth of the room hit her like a wave, and suddenly she was shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. Jacob, hot water, clean cloths, tea with honey. Move. Jacob moved. Ruth crouched in front of Clara, her sharp blue eyes examining the twins with clinical efficiency. How long since they've eaten? 6 hours. Maybe 7. And you? Clara couldn't remember. Yesterday. The day before Ruth's expression told her that was answer enough. Give me one of them. She held out her arms. You can't nurse both at once when you're shaking like that. I'll hold the boy while you feed the girl. Clara hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to hand over her child to a stranger. But Ruth's eyes held no malice. Only practicality. Only the kind of fierce competence that came from decades of keeping people alive. She handed over Samuel. Ruth took him with practiced ease, tucking him against her shoulder, rubbing his back in slow circles. There now, hush. Your mama's right here. She's just getting your sister sorted first. Samuel's cries faded to whimpers. Clara fumbled with the buttons of her dress, her fingers clumsy with cold. Rose latched on hungrily, her small body finally relaxing as warmth and milk flooded through her. That's it? Ruth's voice softened. Good girl, both of you. Jacob returned with a basin of steaming water, clean cloths, a cup of tea. He set everything on the table near Clara, then retreated to the far side of the room, giving her space, giving her dignity. Drink. Ruth nodded at the tea. Don't argue. Don't thank me. Just drink. Clara drank. The honey-sweetened warmth spread through her chest, loosening the frozen knot that had lived there for weeks. How long were you out there? Ruth asked. In the square? 20 minutes. Maybe 30. 20 minutes. Ruth's jaw tightened. In this cold. With 2 infants. And not one person in that square thought to... She stopped. Breathed. Controlled herself. Never mind. You're here now. Mrs. Thornton, I have to be honest with you. Clara's voice came out steadier now. I have 17 cents. That's everything. I can't afford... Child, did I ask about money? No, but... Then don't bring it up. Ruth shifted Samuel to her other shoulder. Right now you're a guest in my home. We'll sort out the rest when you're not half frozen and starving. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why are you... Because I remember. Ruth's voice went quiet. Rough. 30 years ago I came to this territory with nothing but a sick husband and a baby on the way. Nobody helped us. We almost died that first winter. She met Clara's eyes. I swore if I ever saw someone in that position, I'd do different. So here I am, doing different. Clara didn't have words. She held her nursing daughter and watched this fierce old woman comfort her son, and something cracked open in her chest. For the first time in 7 months, she didn't feel completely alone. Bow. The next 3 days passed in a haze of sleep and recovery. Clara barely left the small room Ruth had given her, the blue room, they called it, for the faded blue wallpaper that covered the walls. She slept between the twins' feeding times, ate whatever Ruth brought up, and slowly felt strength seep back into her bones. On the 4th morning, she came downstairs to find Jacob waiting in the common room. He stood when she appeared, hat in hand, freshly shaved, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mrs. Mercer, Clara. He cleared his throat. I was hoping we could talk about work. Clara's heart stuttered. Work? I run a cattle operation. 500 head, give or take. It ain't the biggest spread in the territory, but it's solid. Jacob turned his hat in his hands. Problem is, I'm drowning in paperwork. Account supply orders, breeding records, my wife used to handle all that, and since she... He stopped, swallowed. Since she passed, I've let it go to hell. Clara waited. Let the silence stretch. My mother says you kept books for your husband's business, that you're good with numbers. I am. Then I've got a proposition. Jacob met her eyes. Room and board here at the boarding house. $30 a month on top of that. You'd manage the ranch accounts, handle correspondence, keep the records straight. He paused. It's honest work, hard work, but it'd be yours. Clara's mind raced. $30 a month. Room and board. A chance to build something instead of just survive. People will talk. She had to say it. Had to be sure he understood. A young widow working for a widower, living in his mother's house. After what happened in the square, let them talk. Jacob's voice hardened. I spent 2 years listening to what people said after Sarah died, about how I should move on, find another wife, stop moping around like a ghost. His jaw tightened. I'm done living my life according to what this town thinks. And your mother? My mother suggested I offer you the job. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Said if I didn't, she'd do it herself and take the money out of my inheritance. Clara almost laughed. Almost. Mr. Thornton. Jacob. Jacob. She tested the name. Why me? You don't know anything about me except that I showed up here with nothing and got rejected in your town square. I know you traveled 6 weeks with twin infants and didn't give up. Jacob's eyes held hers. I know you faced down Jeremiah Cobb without crying or begging, even when you had every right to do both. I know you've been through hell and you're still standing. He shrugged. That's enough to start with. Clara looked at him, at this quiet man who'd pulled her out of the snow and offered her a chance when no one else would. Yes. The word came out clear and strong. I'll take the job. Jacob nodded. Once. Sharp. Good. I'll come by tomorrow morning to show you the ranch. He put on his hat, turned toward the door, then paused. Clara, yes. Welcome to Dusty Creek, the real Dusty Creek. His eyes flickered with something she couldn't name. Not that cold mess you met in the square. He left. The door closed behind him, and Clara stood in the warm common room, her children sleeping upstairs, and let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Ruth's reaction to the news was characteristically blunt. About time that boy asked for help. She was rolling out pie crust, her movements quick and efficient. He's been drowning in paperwork since Sarah passed, too stubborn to admit it. You knew he'd offer me work. Clara sat at the kitchen table, Sam on her knee, Rose sleeping in a basket nearby. I suggested he offer you work. There's a difference. Ruth's rolling pin thumped against the counter. Whether he actually did it was up to him. Why? Ruth paused, looked at Clara with those sharp blue eyes. Because you need it. Because he needs it. Because sometimes two broken things can fix each other if they're given half a chance. She resumed rolling. Also because Jeremiah Cobb's been cheating my son on supply orders for 2 years, and I want someone smart enough to catch him at it. Clara blinked. Cheating him? Overcharging. Padding invoices. Nothing big enough to notice if you're not looking, but it adds up. Ruth's voice went hard. Cobb's been squeezing every rancher in this territory, building his empire one stolen dollar at a time. And you think I can catch him? I think you kept books for a business in St. Louis. I think you know what honest numbers look like. Ruth fixed Clara with a piercing stare. Am I wrong? No. Clara's mind was already working. You're not wrong. Good. Ruth went back to her pie crust. Then catch him, make him pay. And while you're at it, help my son remember that he's allowed to live again. Clara didn't ask what that meant. She had a feeling she already knew. The next morning, Jacob arrived at dawn. Clara was already dressed and waiting, the twins bundled and ready for Ruth to watch. She'd spent half the night lying awake planning, strategizing, imagining what the ranch accounts might look like. You're up early. Jacob sounded surprised. Couldn't sleep. Clara pulled on her coat, a worn but serviceable wool thing Ruth had lent her. Kept thinking about those supply orders you mentioned. Already working, and you haven't even seen the books yet. I like to be prepared. Something shifted in Jacob's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Let's go then. They walked through town as the sun came up, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Clara noticed people watching from windows. Noticed the whispers that followed them down the street. She kept her head high. Let them look. That's Cobb's Mercantile. Jacob nodded toward a large building on the corner. Only supply store in town. He's got a monopoly on everything ranchers need. Convenient for him? Profitable, you mean? Jacob's voice darkened. His brother's on the town council. Between the two of them, they've got their fingers in everything. And nobody challenges them. People have tried. They don't try twice. Jacob glanced at her. Cobb's got a way of making problems disappear. or making the people who caused them disappear instead. Clara filed that information away. What happened to the last person who challenged him? Rancher named Pete Sullivan, accused Cobb of price fixing at a cattlemen's meeting. Jacob's jaw tightened. 3 months later, Pete's barn burned down. No proof it was Cobb, but everyone knew. And he's still in business, still respected. Feared, Jacob corrected. There's a difference. Cobb ain't respected. He's just powerful enough that people are scared to cross him. They walked in silence after that, Clara thinking about power and fear and the kind of man who'd humiliate a stranger in the town square to protect his reputation. The ranch appeared over a ridge larger than Clara had expected. A solid wooden house, 2 stories with smoke rising from both chimneys. A massive barn, corrals stretching into the distance where cattle milled and lowed. This is it. Jacob's voice carried a note of pride. Thornton Ranch. My father built the first cabin 60 years ago. I've added to it since. It's beautiful. It's work. But he smiled slightly. Good work, though. The kind that matters. He led her inside to a small office off the main room. Clara stopped in the doorway. Papers everywhere. Stacked on the desk, piled on chairs, scattered across the floor. Ledgers, half-open receipts, crumpled correspondence buried under layers of chaos. This is... Clara searched for diplomatic words. A disaster. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. I know. Sarah kept everything perfect. After she died, I just couldn't. Every time I sat down to work on it, I'd think about her, and I'd have to leave. Clara understood that kind of grief, the way it lived in ordinary objects, made simple tasks impossible. May I? She gestured toward the desk. Please. She moved into the room, picking up the nearest ledger, opening it to a random page. The handwriting was cramped, inconsistent. Numbers that didn't quite add up, dates out of order. But underneath the chaos, she could see the bones of a system. Someone had known what they were doing once. Your wife set this up. Sarah. Yeah. Jacob's voice roughened. She was good at it, better than good. She could look at a column of numbers and just see what was wrong. Clara flipped through more pages, stopped, frowned. Jacob. These feed prices. What about them? They're wrong. She pointed to a line item. You're paying 40% above market rate. What? He moved closer, looking over her shoulder. That can't be right. Cobb said prices went up after the railroad. Prices went up 10%, maybe 15%. Clara pulled another ledger from the pile, cross-referenced. You've been paying 40% more for 2 years. That's hundreds of dollars. Jacob's face went dark. That son of a... He stopped, breathed. Sorry. Don't apologize. Be angry. Clara looked at him directly. You've been robbed, Jacob. Slowly, carefully, but robbed all the same. Can you prove it? Give me a week with these records. Clara's voice went hard. I'll prove it, and then I'll make sure he can never do it again. Jacob stared at her. At this woman who'd arrived in his town with nothing, who'd been broken down in the square, who was now looking at him with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. I believe you. His voice was quiet, certain. God help me, I believe you. Clara threw herself into the work like a woman possessed. For the next 5 days, she lived in that office. She sorted. She categorized. She built systems from chaos. She traced every overcharge, documented every discrepancy, created a paper trail that even Jeremiah Cobb couldn't deny. Ruth brought her meals. Jacob brought her coffee. The twins spent their days in a basket by the fire, watched over by whichever Thornton was available. And slowly, the truth emerged. 2 years of systematic theft. Inflated prices on feed equipment, medicine supplies. Small amounts each time, easy to miss if you weren't looking. But together, $347. Clara showed Jacob the final tally. That's what he's stolen from you. Jacob sat heavily in the office chair. 300? He shook his head. That's almost a year's profit. I know. What do I do with this? He looked at the documentation spread across the desk. Take it to the sheriff. He's Cobb's cousin. Take it to the council. His brother runs it. You take it to the Cattlemen's Association. Clara had been thinking about this. Every rancher in this territory probably has the same problem. Show them the evidence, and suddenly it's not just Jacob Thornton making accusations. It's everyone Cobb's ever cheated. Jacob looked at her, long and steady. You're not what I expected. His voice was soft. When I saw you in that square, I thought, I don't know what I thought. That you needed saving, maybe. I did need saving. Clara met his eyes. But I also needed a chance. You gave me that. And you turned it into this. He gestured at the organized office, the documented evidence, the weapon she'd built from paperwork and patience. Clara, I don't know how to... The front door slammed open. Both of them jumped. Footsteps crossed the main room, heavy, angry, deliberate. Jeremiah Cobb appeared in the office doorway. Thornton. His voice was ice. We need to talk. Jacob stood slowly. About what? About your little bookkeeper here. Jeremiah's eyes fixed on Clara with undisguised hatred. Poking around in business records, asking questions at the feed store, making accusations. She hasn't made any accusations. Jacob's voice stayed calm. Yet. Don't play games with me. Jeremiah stepped into the office. I know what you're doing, trying to turn the other ranchers against me, spreading lies about prices and profits. Are they lies? Clara spoke for the first time. Jeremiah turned on her. You should watch your mouth, Mrs. Mercer. You're not in a position to make enemies. Neither are you. Clara stood her ground. I have documentation of 2 years of overcharges, every invoice, every receipt, every dollar you've stolen. Stolen? Jeremiah laughed. I'm a businessman. I charge what the market will bear. The market bears 40% less than what you've been charging. I checked. Jeremiah's expression flickered, just for a moment. A crack in the mask. Then it was gone, replaced by something colder, darker. You've made a mistake. His voice dropped low. Coming here. Staying here. Getting involved in things that don't concern you. He moved closer. I could make your life very difficult, Mrs. Mercer. I could make sure no one in this territory hires you, speaks to you, helps you. You already tried that. Clara didn't flinch. In the square. Remember, you called me damaged goods in front of the whole town. And yet here you are. Jeremiah's smile was razor thin. Still causing problems. Still not knowing when to quit. I learned that from my mother. Clara's voice was steady. She said the only people who tell you to quit are the ones who are scared you'll succeed. Jeremiah's face went dark. This isn't over. He turned to Jacob. You and your stray. You think you can come after me. You don't know what you're starting. I know exactly what I'm starting. Jacob's voice was quiet, dangerous. I'm starting to fight back. Jeremiah held his gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them. Old hatred, long simmering, finally boiling over. Then Jeremiah turned and walked out. His boots rang against the floor. The front door slammed. Silence filled the office. Clara realized she was shaking. The confrontation had stripped something away, left her raw and exposed. Clara. Jacob's hand closed over her shoulder, warm, steady. You all right? I'm fine. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. He's scared. That's why he came here. He's scared of what we found. He's dangerous. So am I. Jacob looked at her. At this woman who'd faced down Jeremiah Cobb without flinching, who'd built a case against the most powerful man in the territory from nothing but determination and stolen records. Yeah. A slow smile crossed his face. I reckon you are. That night, Clara sat in her room at the boarding house watching her twins sleep. Samuel's small fist curled against his cheek. Rose's rosebud mouth made sucking motions even in dreams. So small, so helpless, so completely dependent on her. She'd come to Dusty Creek looking for safety, for stability, for a future she could count on. Instead, she'd found herself in the middle of a war. Jeremiah Cobb wasn't going to stop. She'd seen that in his eyes today. He'd push back hard using every weapon he had. The council, the town, the gossip mill that had already marked her as damaged goods. But she'd also seen something else today. Something she'd almost forgotten existed. Her own strength. She'd faced down the most powerful man in the territory and hadn't blinked. She'd built a weapon from paperwork and patience. She'd proven that she was more than what happened in that square. Ruth's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes two broken things can fix each other if they're given half a chance. Clara looked at her sleeping children, at the room that had become home, at the future that was finally tentatively taking shape. She wasn't broken anymore. She was just getting started. The knock came just before midnight. Clara jerked awake, heart pounding. Footsteps in the hall. Ruth's voice tight with urgency. "Clara, get dressed, now!" She was out of bed in seconds. "What is it? What's wrong?" Ruth's face appeared in the doorway, pale in the lamplight. "The ranch." Her voice shook. "Someone set fire to Jacob's barn." Clara ran. Her boots slammed against the frozen ground, every breath burning in her chest. Ahead of her, orange light painted the night sky, and the smell of smoke grew thicker with every step. Ruth had stayed with the twins. Jacob had already gone ahead. Clara didn't know why she was running toward a fire instead of away from it, didn't know what she could possibly do when she got there. She just knew she had to go. The barn came into view, and her heart stopped. Flames poured from the hayloft, climbing the wooden walls, reaching toward the black sky like clawing fingers. Cattle screamed in the nearby corral, panicked by the smoke. Men shouted their voices, swallowed by the roar of the fire. And in the center of it all, Jacob. He was leading horses out of the barn, one in each hand, their eyes rolling white with terror. Smoke billowed around him. Sparks rained down on his shoulders. He didn't stop. "Jacob!" Clara screamed his name, but the fire swallowed the sound. She ran toward the corral, where the cattle were pressing against the fence, threatening to trample each other in their panic. A man she didn't recognize was trying to open the gate, but the animals kept surging against it, making it impossible. "Move!" Clara grabbed a horse blanket from the ground and waved it at the cattle, driving them back from the gate. "Get them back! Now!" The man stared at her for half a second, then understood. He grabbed another blanket, and together they pushed the cattle away from the gate, creating enough space to swing it open. The animals poured out into the night, scattering across the snow-covered field. Better loose than dead. Clara turned back to the barn. Jacob had gotten the horses out, but was heading back inside. "Jacob, no." He disappeared into the smoke. Clara ran toward the barn door. Heat hit her like a wall, pushing her back. She could barely see through the smoke, couldn't make out anything inside. Jacob? Nothing, just the roar of flames and the crack of burning timber. She pulled her shawl over her mouth and stepped into the inferno. The heat was unbearable. Her eyes streamed, her lungs screamed for clean air, but she pushed forward one step at a time, searching for any sign of him. "Jacob, where are you?" A crash somewhere to her left. A beam falling. Clara flinched away, felt the heat sear past her face. "Clara!" His voice somewhere ahead. She stumbled toward it, tripping over debris, her hand finding a stall door and using it to guide her forward. Then she saw him. Jacob was pinned against the back wall, a fallen beam across his path, flames climbing on either side. He was trying to lift it, but the wood was too heavy, and every second the fire grew closer. "Go back!" he shouted when he saw her. "Get out of here! Not without you!" Clara grabbed the other end of the beam. The wood was hot enough to burn through her gloves. She didn't care. On 3, she braced herself. 1, 2, 3. They lifted together. Clara's arms screamed. Her back threatened to give out, but the beam moved inch by inch until there was just enough space for Jacob to squeeze through. He grabbed her hand and they ran. The barn groaned behind them. Timbers cracked. The roof began to cave. They burst through the door and kept running, didn't stop until they were 50 feet away, collapsed in the snow, gasping for air. Clara's lungs burned. Her hands throbbed where the hot wood had seared through her gloves. But she was alive. They were both alive. "You stupid, stubborn woman." Jacob's voice was hoarse, rough with smoke. "You could have died in there." "So could you." Clara coughed, trying to clear her lungs. "What were you thinking going back in?" "There was a calf. Newborn. I couldn't just—" He stopped, coughed. "I couldn't save it. The smoke was too thick. I couldn't find it." Clara heard the anguish in his voice. This man who'd lost so much already losing more tonight. She reached over and took his hand. Didn't say anything. Just held on. They sat together in the snow, watching the barn burn while ranch hands scrambled to contain the fire and save what they could. It wasn't until dawn that the full damage became clear. The barn was gone. Total loss. 3 calves dead from smoke. Thousands of dollars in feed and equipment destroyed. The main house had been saved only because the wind shifted at the last moment, carrying the sparks away instead of toward it. Clara stood in the gray morning light surveying the destruction. Her borrowed dress was ruined, scorched, and torn. Her hands were bandaged where the burns had blistered. She hadn't slept. This wasn't an accident. Jacob stood beside her, his face streaked with soot. His eyes red from smoke and something darker. The fire started in 3 places at once. His voice was flat, empty. Hank found the kerosene cans behind the corral. Someone did this deliberately. Clara's stomach turned to ice. Cobb. Can't prove it. Jacob's jaw tightened. He's too smart for that. Probably hired someone passing through paid cash, made sure there was no connection. But we know. Knowing and proving are different things. Jacob turned to look at her. "This is what I meant, Clara. This is what he does. You push, he pushes back. Harder. Meaner. Without any lines, he won't cross." Clara looked at the smoking ruins, at the dead calves being dragged away, at the ranch hands who'd worked through the night to save what they could. "Then we push harder." "Clara. He thinks this will break us." She turned to face Jacob, her chin raised, her eyes blazing despite her exhaustion. "He thinks we'll back down, apologize, forget what we found. That's what everyone else has done. That's why he keeps winning. And if we don't back down, if we keep pushing," Jacob's voice was rough, "what then? He burns down the house next time, hurts you. Hurts the twins." Clara's heart clenched at the mention of her children, but she didn't waver. "We don't fight alone." She'd been thinking about this all night between the flames and the fear. "We take the evidence to the Cattlemen's Association like we planned. Show them what Cobb's been doing, what he did tonight. Make it everyone's fight, not just ours." "You think they'll stand with us?" "I think they've been waiting for someone to stand up first." Clara met his eyes. "You said it yourself. People aren't afraid of Cobb because he's respected. They're afraid because no one's ever fought back and won. What if we're the ones who change that?" Jacob stared at her for a long moment. This woman who'd been humiliated in the town square less than 2 weeks ago, who'd built a case against the most powerful man in the territory, who'd run into a burning barn to save him. "You really believe we can win?" "I believe we have to try." Clara's voice softened. "Jacob, I came to Dusty Creek with nothing. Less than nothing. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Let me help you fight this. Let me help you take back what he's stolen." Something shifted in Jacob's expression. The defeat that had been creeping in since the fire began to recede replaced by something harder, sharper. All right. He nodded slowly. We fight. Together. Clara felt relief flood through her. Together. But Clara! Jacob's hand caught hers, his grip firm despite the exhaustion. If it gets too dangerous, if there's any threat to you or the twins, you take them and go. Promise me. Jacob, promise me. His eyes held hers, fierce and afraid. I've already lost everyone I loved once. I can't. He stopped, swallowed. I can't do that again. Clara's throat tightened. She understood what he was saying, what he wasn't saying. I promise. The words came out barely above a whisper. But it won't come to that. We're going to win this, Jacob. We're going to make him pay for everything he's done. Jacob squeezed her hand once, then released it. Then let's get to work. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jacob called a meeting of the Cattlemen's Association for the following Saturday. Clara spent every waking moment preparing the evidence, organizing documents, practicing her presentation until she could recite the numbers in her sleep. Ruth watched the twins during the day and worried at night. You're pushing too hard. She caught Clara in the kitchen at midnight poring over records by lamplight. You need rest. I'll rest when this is over. You'll collapse before it's over if you keep this up. Ruth set a cup of tea in front of her. Drink, then sleep. The papers will still be there in the morning. Clara wanted to argue, but her eyes were burning and her hands were shaking, and she knew Ruth was right. 1 hour. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Then I need to finish the summary for the Henderson Ranch. Ruth sat down across from her. Tell me something, child. Why does this matter so much to you? Clara looked up. What do you mean? I mean, you've been here 2 weeks. You could walk away from this fight. Take your wages, find another position somewhere else, start fresh, where Cobb can't touch you. Ruth's eyes were sharp, searching. Instead, you're burning yourself out to take down a man who wronged complete strangers. Why? Clara was quiet for a long moment. The question deserved an honest answer. Because I've been the person no one stood up for. The words came slowly, pulled from somewhere deep. In St. Louis, after William died, I watched people turn away. Friends, neighbors, people I'd known for years. They saw me struggling, and they looked the other way because getting involved was inconvenient. She stared into her tea, seeing the past reflected in the dark liquid. Every rancher Cobb has cheated, every family he's stolen from, they're struggling too. They're looking around wondering why nobody helps, why nobody fights back. Clara looked up at Ruth. I can't change what happened to me in St. Louis, but I can change what happens here. I can be the person who stands up even if it's hard, even if it's dangerous. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and covered Clara's bandaged hands with her own. Sarah would have liked you. Her voice was rough with emotion. My Jacob's wife. She had that same fire in her, that same stubbornness. A sad smile crossed her face. He sees it too, you know. Why do you think he's fighting so hard? Clara's cheeks warmed. Ruth, I'm not matchmaking. I'm just observing. Ruth stood, her practical manner returning. Now drink your tea and go to sleep. You'll need your strength for what's coming. Clara obeyed. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, Ruth's words echoed in her mind. He sees it too. She didn't know what to do with that. Didn't have room in her heart for anything except the fight ahead. But some small part of her, some part she'd thought was dead and buried, stirred to life. And she let it. Saturday arrived cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. The Cattlemen's Association met in the back room of the Dusty Creek Saloon. 15 ranchers from across the territory, men who controlled thousands of head of cattle and hundreds of miles of land. Clara had never been more nervous in her life. "You ready?" Jacob asked as they approached the saloon. "No." Clara clutched the folder of documents to her chest. "But I'm going anyway." The room fell silent when they entered. 15 weathered faces turned toward them. Clara saw surprise in some, hostility in others. One woman in a room full of men. One woman who'd been publicly rejected in the town square less than 3 weeks ago. She lifted her chin and walked to the front of the room. "Gentlemen?" Her voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. "Thank you for coming. I know you're busy men with better things to do than listen to a stranger, so I'll keep this brief." She opened her folder and began laying documents on the table. "In the past 2 weeks, I've reviewed Thornton Ranch's financial records. What I found was systematic overcharging by Cobb Mercantile. Feed prices inflated by 40%. Equipment marked up beyond market rate. Medicine supplies, even basic goods, priced higher than anywhere else in the territory." Murmurs rippled through the room. Clara pressed on. "The total theft from Thornton Ranch over 2 years comes to $347. Nearly a year's profit." She looked around the room. "I suspect similar numbers exist in your books. Similar patterns. Similar theft." "Now hold on." A large man in the back stood up. Clara recognized him as Henry Morrison, owner of the second largest spread in the territory. "You're making serious accusations against a respected businessman. You got proof." "I have documentation." Clara pulled out a stack of invoices. Every overcharge, every inflated price, cross-referenced with market rates from Chicago and Denver. She held them up. "It's all here. Anyone who wants to see it is welcome." More murmurs, some angry, some uncertain. Clara saw men exchanging glances, saw the doubt warring with the hope. "Even if this is true," another rancher spoke up, "what do you expect us to do about it? Cobb's got the council in his pocket. The sheriff's his cousin. We can't fight him alone." "You're not alone." Jacob stepped forward, his voice carrying across the room. "That's the point. Cobb wins because we let him pick us off one by one. We're scared to stand together because we think no one else will back us up." He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. 3 nights ago, someone burned down my barn. 3 calves dead. Thousands of dollars in damage. We found kerosene cans behind the corral." His jaw tightened. "No proof it was Cobb, but we all know the truth. This is what he does. This is how he keeps us in line." "So what's changed?" Morrison asked. "Why should we stick our necks out now?" "Because now we have evidence." Clara spoke up. "Documentation that proves what he's been doing. If we present this together as an association, it's not one rancher making accusations, it's all of us. That's harder to ignore, harder to suppress. And if he retaliates, a younger rancher near the door, burns our barns too, then he proves our point." Clara's voice hardened. "Gentlemen, I understand the fear. I've felt it myself, but consider the alternative. Keep paying Cobb's inflated prices. Keep watching your profits disappear into his pockets. Keep living under his thumb, hoping he doesn't decide you're next." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Or we fight back. Together. We take this evidence to the territorial authorities. We find new suppliers even if we have to bring them in from outside. We show Cobb that he can't terrorize this community anymore." Silence fell over the room. Clara's heart pounded. She'd said everything she could say. Now it was up to them. Morrison was the first to speak. "I've suspected Cobb was cheating me for years." His voice was gruff. "Never could prove it. Never had the guts to push." He looked at Clara with something like respect. "This woman's been here less than a month, and she's done more than any of us." He stood up, crossed the room, and took one of Clara's documents. "I'm in." He looked around at the others. "Who's with me?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then another rancher stood, and another, and another. One by one they rose from their seats until every man in the room was standing. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back hard. "All right then." Morrison's voice rang through the room. Let's show Jeremiah Cobb what happens when he crosses the wrong people. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. They formed committees, assigned tasks, created a plan for presenting the evidence to the territorial authorities, discussed alternative suppliers and ways to break Cobb's monopoly. Clara took notes, answered questions, provided documentation. By the end, her voice was hoarse and her hands were cramping, but she'd never felt more alive. You did good. Jacob found her afterward as the ranchers filed out into the cold. Better than good. You convinced them. They convinced themselves. Clara gathered her papers. They just needed someone to go first. And that someone was you. Jacob's eyes were warm in the lamplight. Clara, I don't know how to thank you. What you've done for this ranch, for this community. Don't thank me yet. Clara stuffed the papers into her folder. We haven't won anything. We've just started fighting. But we've started. Jacob's hand caught her arm, stopping her. That matters. That matters more than you know. Clara looked up at him, at this man who'd pulled her out of the snow and given her a chance, who'd stood beside her through threats and fire and fear. Jacob, The saloon door banged open. A boy, maybe 12 years old, burst through, his face red from running. Mr. Thornton. Mrs. Mercer. He gasped for breath. You gotta come quick. There's trouble at the boarding house. Man showed up, started yelling, said he's gonna... Clara's blood went cold. The twins. Are my children? Mrs. Ruth's got 'em locked in the kitchen, but the man won't leave. He's saying... The boy swallowed. He's saying the babies ain't yours. Saying he's come to take them back where they belong. Clara was running before he finished the sentence. She burst through the boarding house door to find chaos. Ruth stood in front of the kitchen doorway, a cast-iron skillet in her hand, her face set in fury. Two men Clara didn't recognize flanked a third man she'd never seen before. Tall, thin, with a face like a ferret, and eyes that made her skin crawl. And behind them, watching from the corner with a smile of pure satisfaction, stood Jeremiah Cobb. There she is. The ferret-faced man pointed at Clara. That's the woman who stole my brother's children. I never... Clara's voice caught. I don't know who you are. I've never seen you before in my life. I'm Edgar Mercer. The man stepped forward. William's brother, and those children in there are my family's property. You had no right to take them. Property. Clara's shock gave way to fury. They're not property. They're my children. I gave birth to them. After my brother died. Edgar's lip curled. Convenient, wasn't it? The way he passed before anyone could verify those brats were really his. Clara felt like she'd been slapped. How dare you? I have documentation. Edgar pulled a folded paper from his coat. Signed by a judge in St. Louis. It says those children should be in the custody of their father's family, not a widow of questionable character who ran off to the frontier to escape her debts. That's a lie. Clara's voice shook. William had no family. He told me... William said a lot of things. Edgar's smile was poison. Most of them weren't true. But I'm the truth, Mrs. Mercer. And I'm here to take what's mine. Clara's mind raced. This couldn't be real. William had told her he had no family, no brothers, no parents, no one. She'd believed him. She'd never had reason not to. But what if he'd lied? Let me see that document. Jacob had arrived, pushing through the door behind Clara. He held out his hand. If you've got legal claim, prove it. Edgar hesitated. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. That was all Clara needed. You don't have anything. Her voice steadied. That paper's a fake. There is no judge in St. Louis who would give custody of children to a man who's never met them. Mrs. Mercer? No. Clara stepped forward, her fear transforming into something hotter, sharper. I don't know who you are, or who paid you to come here, but I know a lie when I hear one. William Mercer was an only child. His parents died when he was 12. He told me that on our wedding night, and he had no reason to lie. She looked past Edgar to where Cobb stood watching. "But you do. Don't you, Mr. Cobb?" Cobb's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Clara's voice carried across the room. "I think you hired this man to show up with fake papers and intimidate me. Make me scared enough to back down, drop the case against you, disappear." "That's quite an accusation." "It's the truth." Clara felt strength flowing through her hot and fierce. "You tried threats. You tried fire. Now you're trying to take my children. But it won't work." She stepped closer to Cobb, close enough to see the anger flickering behind his calm mask. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither is the evidence against you." Cobb's facade cracked. Just for a second. Just enough for Clara to see the rage underneath. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Mercer." His voice dropped low, dangerous. "A very serious mistake. The only mistake I made was coming to this town expecting you to be a decent human being." Clara held his gaze. "But I've learned my lesson. And I've learned something else too." She smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "I've learned that bullies only win when people let them. And I'm done letting you win." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Jacob stepped forward. "Edgar, or whatever your name really is, I suggest you leave. Now, before I have you arrested for attempted kidnapping." "You can't. I'm deputy chairman of the Cattlemen's Association." Jacob's voice was iron. "And we just voted unanimously to support Mrs. Mercer and investigate Jeremiah Cobb's business practices. So unless you want to be the first casualty of that investigation, I suggest you walk out that door and don't look back." Edgar looked at Cobb. Cobb's jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod. "This isn't over." Edgar backed toward the door. "Those children are mine." Clara's voice cut like a blade. "And if you come near them again, I'll make sure every judge in the territory knows exactly what you tried to do here tonight." Edgar fled. Cobb lingered a moment longer, his eyes locked on Clara's. "You've made an enemy, Mrs. Mercer." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "I hope you understand what that means." "I understand perfectly." Clara didn't blink. "It means you're scared. And you should be." Cobb turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Ruth lowered the skillet. Jacob exhaled, and Clara's legs finally gave out. She sank into the nearest chair, her whole body shaking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation drained away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and fear. "The twins." Her voice cracked. "Are they safe?" Ruth hurried to the kitchen door, opening it to reveal Sam and Rose sleeping peacefully in their basket, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded around them. "They slept through the whole thing, bless their hearts." Clara stumbled to the basket and fell to her knees beside it. She gathered both babies into her arms, held them against her chest, and finally let the tears come. "Hey." Jacob knelt beside her, his hand warm on her back. "It's okay. You're safe. They're safe. It's over." "It's not over." Clara's voice was muffled against Samuel's soft hair. "You heard him. This isn't over." "Maybe not." Jacob's hand moved in slow circles. "But you won tonight, Clara. You stood up to him, called his bluff, and won. That matters." Clara looked up at him through her tears. At this man who'd stood beside her through everything. Who'd fought for her when he had every reason to walk away. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate. "Jacob, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't. You would have fought." His voice was certain. "With or without me. That's who you are, Clara. That's who you've always been." He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch was gentle, careful, like she was something precious. "Get some rest." He stood, offered her his hand. "Tomorrow we start planning our next move, but tonight you've earned some peace." Clara let him help her up, let him guide her toward the stairs. let Ruth take the twins, and promised to watch them through the night. And when she finally collapsed into bed exhausted beyond measure, she didn't dream of fire or fear or Jeremiah Cobb's cold eyes. She dreamed of green grass and warm sunshine and a future where her children grew up safe and free. It wasn't real yet, but it would be. She'd make sure of it. The next morning, Clara woke to find Ruth sitting at the foot of her bed. "We need to talk." Ruth's voice was quiet, serious. "About what happened last night." Clara sat up slowly, her body aching from exhaustion. "What about it? That man, Edgar." Ruth's hands twisted in her apron. "He wasn't lying about everything." Clara's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean I did some asking around after you went to sleep, sent word to a friend in St. Louis." Ruth's eyes met hers. William Mercer did have a brother. Half-brother, really. Different mothers. They hadn't spoken in years, but he existed. Clara felt the floor shift beneath her. "William told me he had no family. He swore—" "Men swear a lot of things." Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. "Doesn't make them true. My guess William was ashamed of his brother. Maybe they had a falling out. Maybe there was bad blood. Either way, he kept it from you." Clara's mind raced. If Edgar was real, if he had any legitimate claim to the twins, if those papers weren't entirely fake, don't. Ruth reached out and gripped her hand. "Don't go down that road. Even if Edgar Mercer is who he says he is, he's got no claim to those children. You're their mother. You gave birth to them. No court in the territory would take them from you." "But what if—" "What if nothing?" Ruth's voice hardened. "Cobb brought that man here to scare you, to make you doubt yourself, doubt your right to your own children. Don't let him win." Clara swallowed hard. Ruth was right. She knew Ruth was right. But the fear had taken root, burrowing deep into her chest, where it coiled around her heart. "I need to know the truth." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to find out everything about Edgar Mercer, about William's family, about whatever Cobb dug up to use against me. Then we'll find out." Ruth squeezed her hand. "Together. But first, you need to eat. And those babies need feeding. Everything else can wait an hour." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to rush out and start digging immediately. But Samuel was crying from the basket in the corner, and Rose was starting to stir, and Ruth was right. Some things couldn't wait. She fed the twins. She ate breakfast. She let Ruth fuss over her burnt hands, which were healing, but still tender. And then she went to find Jacob. He was at the ranch, surveying the ruins of the barn with Hank, his foreman. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, acrid and bitter. Clara's throat tightened at the sight. "Jacob!" He turned. His face was tired, lined with exhaustion and worry, but his eyes warmed when he saw her. "Clara, you should be resting." "I'll rest when this is over." She crossed to him, ignoring Hank's curious look. "We need to talk. About Edgar Mercer." Jacob's expression darkened. "What about him?" "Ruth says he might be real. William's half-brother." Clara forced the words out. "I didn't know. William never told me." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I figured it might be something like that. Cobb's too smart to use a completely fake story. He'd want something with enough truth to stick." "So what do I do?" Clara hated the desperation in her voice. "If Edgar has any real claim, he doesn't." Jacob's voice was firm. "Clara, listen to me. I don't care if Edgar Mercer is the King of England. He's got no right to your children. The law is clear on this. A mother's claim comes first, especially when the father's dead and there was no prior custody arrangement. But if Cobb's lawyers can try whatever they want." Jacob stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders. "We'll fight them, every step of the way. You're not alone in this, Clara. You understand, whatever comes, we face it together." Clara looked up at him. At this man who'd given her so much already, who kept giving even when it cost him. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Jacob, why are you doing all this? The job, the protection fighting Cobb, you could have stayed out of it, kept your head down. Why get involved? Jacob's hands tightened on her shoulders. His eyes held hers, and something shifted in their depths. You really don't know. Clara's heart stuttered. Know what? Clara, He stopped, swallowed, started again. When I saw you in that square kneeling in the snow with those babies, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years, since Sarah died. Clara couldn't breathe. I told myself I was just helping a stranger, just being decent. But it was more than that. Even then it was more. Jacob's voice roughened. And every day since watching you fight, watching you refuse to break, watching you become part of this ranch and this community, Clara, I can't pretend anymore. Jacob, I love you. The words came out raw, almost painful. I know it's too soon. I know you've got enough to deal with without me complicating things. But I can't watch you doubt yourself, doubt why I'm fighting for you and not tell you the truth. Clara's eyes burned with tears. Jacob, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He released her shoulders, stepped back. I didn't tell you to pressure you or expect anything. I told you because you asked, and you deserve honesty. Clara stood frozen, her mind spinning. Everything she'd believed about her situation, about her place here, about what was possible, it was all shifting, reforming into something new. I'm scared. The admission came out small, fragile. I've lost so much already. William, my home, everything I thought my life would be. And now you're standing here telling me... Her voice broke. What if I lose this too? What if I let myself feel something and it all falls apart? Then we fall apart together. Jacob's voice was quiet, certain. Clara, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to stand beside you, whatever happens. Clara looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, at the strength in his stance, at this man who'd pulled her from the snow and never stopped fighting for her. And for the first time since William's death, she let herself want something. Okay. The word was barely a whisper. Okay, Jacob. Let's face it together. His smile was like sunrise after a long night, but they didn't have long to savor the moment. Hank cleared his throat from behind them. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but we got company coming. Looks like the sheriff. Clara's stomach dropped. Jacob's expression hardened. They turned to see a rider approaching from the direction of town. Sheriff Tom Reeves, Jeremiah Cobb's cousin, riding slowly but deliberately toward the ranch. Go inside. Jacob's voice was tight. Let me handle this. No. Clara lifted her chin. Whatever this is, we face it together. Remember. Jacob looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Together, then. Sheriff Reeves reined in his horse a few feet away. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze directly. Thornton. He nodded at Jacob. Mrs. Mercer. Sheriff? Jacob's voice was carefully neutral. What brings you out here? Official business. Reeves pulled a folded paper from his coat. Got a complaint filed against Mrs. Mercer. Fraud, theft, and falsification of business documents. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. What? Complaint says you doctored Thornton Ranch's financial records to make false accusations against a respected businessman. Reeves still wouldn't meet her eyes. Says you're running some kind of scheme to extort money from Jeremiah Cobb. That's a lie. Clara's voice shook with fury. Every document I produced is accurate. I can prove... Ma'am, I'm not here to argue. Reeves finally looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes. Discomfort, maybe, or shame. I'm just here to inform you that there's an official complaint, and there'll be a hearing next week to address it. A hearing where... Jacob stepped forward. In front of the town council, the one Cobb's brother runs. That's the proper authority for civil complaints, yes. That's not a hearing. That's a setup. Jacob's hands clenched at his sides. You know what Cobb's doing, Tom. You know this is retaliation. What I know isn't relevant. Reeves stuffed the paper back in his coat. What matters is what can be proved. And right now, Mrs. Mercer's the one making accusations she can't back up. I can back up every single one. Clara forced her voice steady. I have documentation, invoices, receipts, market comparisons. Then you'll have a chance to present them at the hearing. Reeves turned his horse. Monday, 10 o'clock, Town Hall. He rode away without looking back. Clara stood in the cold morning air watching him go, feeling the trap closing around her. This is Cobb's move. Jacob's voice was tight. He knows we've got the Cattlemen's Association behind us, so he's trying to discredit you before we can act. Can he do that? Can he actually? He can try. Jacob turned to face her. The council's in his pocket, but that doesn't mean he'll win. We've got evidence. We've got witnesses. We've got 15 ranchers who'll testify that Cobb's been cheating them for years. Will that be enough? Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand. It has to be. The next 5 days were the longest of Clara's life. She prepared for the hearing like she was preparing for war. Every document organized, every number verified, every overcharge documented and cross-referenced. She barely slept, barely ate, barely saw her children except when she was nursing them. Ruth worried. Jacob worried. Even Hank, the taciturn foreman, started bringing her coffee and telling her to take breaks. Clara ignored them all. On Saturday, 2 days before the hearing, Margaret Dawson came to visit. Clara had met Margaret briefly at the cattlemen's meeting, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s who owned the dress shop and dry goods store. She'd been one of the first to speak up in support of Clara's evidence. I heard about the hearing. Margaret settled into a chair in Ruth's common room. And I heard what Cobb's claiming. It's all lies. Clara's voice came out flat, exhausted. Of course it is. Everyone with half a brain knows that. Margaret leaned forward. But here's the thing, Clara. Cobb's not trying to win on facts. He's trying to win on reputation, on perception. What do you mean? I mean he's going to paint you as an outsider, a desperate woman who came to town with nothing and tried to scheme her way into security. Margaret's eyes were sharp. He'll talk about how you were rejected in the square, how you latched onto Jacob Thornton, how you've been stirring up trouble since you arrived. Clara's stomach churned. But that's not... I know it's not true. You know it's not true. But the people on that council... Margaret shook her head. Some of them will believe what they want to believe, and Cobb will make it easy for them. So what do I do? Margaret smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. You fight fire with fire. You make them see you the way we see you, not as a desperate outsider, but as a woman who's contributed to this community, who's helped people, who's earned her place here. How? Testimonials. Not just from ranchers about Cobb's cheating those matter, but they're about him, not you. Margaret pulled a list from her pocket. I've been talking to people, women mostly, people you've helped without even realizing it. Clara took the list, read the names. Sarah Hendricks helped her with bookkeeping advice for her husband's small farm. Mary Chen watched her children for an afternoon when Mary was sick. Old Mrs. Patterson brought her food when she heard she was ailing. Clara looked up. I barely did anything. These were just kindness. Margaret's voice softened. Clara, that's the point. You've been so focused on the big fight that you haven't noticed all the small ways you've become part of this community. These women will speak for you. They'll tell the council who you really are, not who Cobb wants them to think you are. Clara stared at the list, at the evidence of connections she'd made without trying, without even noticing. Will it be enough? I don't know. Margaret was honest. But it's a chance. And right now, that's all we've got. Monday morning arrived gray and bitter. Clara, dressed in her best dress, the blue one she'd worn for her first day of work, now mended and pressed until it looked almost new. Ruth had stayed up half the night fixing it. "You look respectable." Ruth straightened Clara's collar. "More than respectable. You look like a woman who belongs here." "I don't feel like I belong anywhere." "That's nerves talking." Ruth's hands were warm on her shoulders. "You've earned your place, Clara. Today you prove it." Jacob was waiting outside with the wagon. His face was freshly shaved, his clothes clean, his expression set in grim determination. "Ready." Clara climbed up beside him. "No, but I'm going anyway." The town hall was packed. Clara had expected a crowd, but not like this. Every seat was full. People stood along the walls. More crowded outside, peering through windows. The whole territory had come to watch. Councilman Elijah Cobb sat at the front, flanked by 4 other council members. His face was carefully neutral, but Clara saw triumph lurking in his eyes. Jeremiah Cobb sat in the front row, directly in Clara's line of sight. His smile made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Mercer," Councilman Cobb's voice echoed through the room. "You're here to answer charges of fraud, theft, and falsification of documents." "How do you plead?" Clara stood. Her knees trembled, but her voice was steady. "Not guilty, on all counts." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Councilman Cobb's expression didn't change. "Very well. Mr. Jeremiah Cobb, please present your evidence." Jeremiah stood smoothing his expensive coat. "Thank you, brother. I mean, Councilman." A few people snickered. Elijah's face tightened. "My evidence is simple." Jeremiah turned to address the crowd as much as the council. "This woman arrived in Dusty Creek less than a month ago with nothing. No money, no connections, no prospects. She was publicly rejected by her intended husband and taken in by the Thorntons out of Christian charity." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Within days, she'd inserted herself into Thornton Ranch's business affairs. Within weeks, she was making wild accusations against respected businessmen. Jeremiah's voice dripped with false concern. "I submit that Mrs. Mercer is a confidence woman who saw an opportunity and took it. She manipulated the Thorntons' grief, exploited their trust, and fabricated evidence to extort money from honest merchants." "That's a lie." Jacob was on his feet. Every word of it. "Mr. Thornton, you'll have your chance to speak." Councilman Cobb's voice was sharp. "Sit down." Jacob sat, but Clara could feel his fury radiating beside her. "I have witnesses." Jeremiah continued. "People who'll testify that Mrs. Mercer's calculations are flawed, that her accusations are baseless, that she's been using the Thorntons for her own ends." He called his witnesses. A clerk from his store who claimed Clara's numbers were wrong. A bookkeeper from Denver who'd supposedly reviewed her work and found errors. A woman from St. Louis who testified that Clara had left behind unpaid debts and a trail of broken promises. Each lie was polished, professional, devastating. By the time they finished, Clara felt like she'd been flayed alive. "Mrs. Mercer." Councilman Cobb's voice was almost gentle. "You may present your defense." Clara stood. Her legs shook. Her heart pounded. She looked around the room at all the faces watching her. Some hostile. Some curious. Some pitying. And some she found them one by one supportive. Ruth sitting near the back, her face fierce with protective love. Margaret Dawson nodding encouragement. The ranchers from the association scattered throughout the crowd. The women from Margaret's list, the ones she'd helped without thinking. She wasn't alone. Clara straightened her spine and began to speak. "I did arrive in Dusty Creek with nothing. Mr. Cobb is right about that. I had 17 cents, 2 babies, and the clothes on my back. I'd sold everything I owned to answer a mail-order advertisement that turned out to be a cruel trick." She paused. Let the words sink in. "I was humiliated in your town square, rejected publicly. left to freeze with my infants while your community watched and did nothing." Her voice hardened. "Nothing, that is, except for Jacob Thornton, who saw a stranger in need and chose to help." Clara pulled her folder of documents from her bag. "I didn't insert myself into Thornton Ranch's affairs. I was hired, given work because I was qualified to do it, and what I found when I looked at those records was theft." She held up the first invoice. 40% overcharges on feed. Here's the proof. Market rates from Chicago, market rates from Denver, and what Cobb Mercantile charged. She moved to the next document. Equipment marked up beyond any reasonable profit margin. Here's the comparison. And the next. Medicine priced higher than anywhere else in the territory. She faced the council directly. "I didn't falsify anything. I didn't fabricate evidence. I documented what was already there in black and white in Mr. Cobb's own invoices." She pointed at Jeremiah. "He's the fraud. He's the thief. And he's standing here accusing me of his own crimes because I had the audacity to expose them." The room erupted. People shouting. Council members banging for order. Jeremiah Cobb's face twisted with rage. Through it all, Clara stood steady, unmoving, unflinching. When the chaos finally subsided, Councilman Cobb's face was thunderous. "Mrs. Mercer, these are serious accusations." "They're facts." Clara cut him off. "And I have 15 ranchers from the Cattlemen's Association who'll testify to the same patterns in their own accounts. This hearing is about charges against you, not against my brother. Your brother is only charging me because I threatened his business." Clara's voice rose. "He burned down Jacob Thornton's barn. He sent a man claiming to be my dead husband's brother to try to take my children. He's done everything in his power to intimidate and silence me, and when that didn't work, he filed false charges to destroy my reputation. You have no proof of any of that. I have the truth." Clara turned to face the crowd. "And so do all of you. You've watched Jeremiah Cobb build his empire by squeezing every rancher, every farmer, every small businessman in this territory. You've stayed silent because you were scared. Because he has power, and you don't." She paused, meeting eyes throughout the room. "But there are more of us than there are of him. And if we stand together, if we stop letting fear keep us quiet, we can end this. Today." Silence fell over the room. Then Henry Morrison stood up. "Listen, I've got the same evidence she does." His voice carried through the hall. "Overcharges going back 5 years. Cobb's been stealing from me, same as Thornton." Another rancher stood. "Me too. 3 years of inflated prices." And another, and another. One by one, the ranchers from the association rose to their feet, each one adding their voice to the chorus. Then the women started standing. Sarah Hendricks. "Mrs. Mercer helped me understand my husband's accounts. She didn't charge a penny." Mary Chen. "She watched my children when I was sick, brought me soup, never asked for nothing in return." Old Mrs. Patterson, helped up by her granddaughter. "That woman's got more kindness in her little finger than Jeremiah Cobb's got in his whole body." More and more voices. More and more people standing. Until half the room was on their feet, testifying not just to Cobb's crimes, but to Clara's character. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to stop them. Councilman Cobb looked around the room, his face pale. His brother was gripping the edge of his seat, his knuckles white with fury. This is highly irregular. This is democracy." Margaret Dawson's voice cut through the chaos. "The people are speaking, Councilman. The question is whether you'll listen." The other council members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a younger man Clara didn't recognize, leaned forward. "I move to dismiss all charges against Mrs. Mercer." His voice was clear. "And to open an investigation into the business practices of Cobb Mercantile." Seconded. Another council member. "This is outrageous." Councilman Cobb slammed his hand on the table. "You can't. We can." The young council member stood. "And we will. All in favor." 3 hands went up, then a fourth. Only Councilman Cobb's remained down. Motion carries. The young man turned to Clara. Mrs. Mercer, you're cleared of all charges. Mr. Jeremiah Cobb, you're hereby ordered to open your business records for official review. The room exploded. Clara stood in the chaos, surrounded by people reaching out to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to thank her. She couldn't process any of it, could barely breathe. Then Jacob was there, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight while the world spun around them. You did it. His voice was rough in her ear. Clara, you did it. We did it. She pulled back to look at him, at his face blazing with pride and love. All of us. Together. Together. He smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out. Yeah. Together. From across the room, Jeremiah Cobb watched them with murder in his eyes. But for now, for this moment, Clara didn't care. She'd won. And she was just getting started. The celebration lasted 3 days. Ranchers rode in from across the territory to shake Clara's hand, to thank her, to share their own stories of Cobb's cheating. Women brought food to the boarding house until Ruth's kitchen overflowed. Children ran through the streets shouting about the lady who'd beaten the merchant. Clara barely remembered any of it. She moved through the congratulations in a daze, smiling when expected, nodding at the right moments, accepting embraces from people whose names she couldn't recall. The victory felt unreal, like something that had happened to someone else. On the 4th morning, she woke before dawn and found herself unable to stay in bed. The boarding house was quiet. The twins slept peacefully in their basket. Ruth's snores drifted from down the hall. Clara pulled on her shawl and slipped outside into the cold. The sky was just beginning to lighten gray, giving way to pale pink at the edges. Clara walked without direction, her feet carrying her through the empty streets until she found herself at the edge of town, looking out at the snow-covered prairie. She'd won. Against all odds, against a man with money and power, and the whole town in his pocket, she'd won. So why did she feel so hollow? Couldn't sleep either. Clara turned. Jacob stood a few feet behind her, his breath fogging in the cold air. How'd you know I was here? Saw you from the ranch house. He moved to stand beside her. Been watching the sunrise from the porch. Saw someone walking and figured it might be you. You figured right. They stood in silence for a while, watching the light spread across the sky. You're not celebrating with everyone else. Jacob's voice was quiet, observant. Neither are you. I asked first. Clara almost smiled. Almost. I don't know how to explain it. She wrapped her arms around herself. We won. Cobb's being investigated. The charges against me were dropped. Everything I hoped for happened. She paused. So why do I feel like I'm waiting for the other boot to drop? Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Because you've learned not to trust good things. Clara looked at him sharply. I know that feeling. Jacob's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. After Sarah died, people told me it would get better. That time would heal. And eventually it did. But for a long time, every good moment felt like a trap. Like the world was just setting me up for another loss. Clara's throat tightened. How did you get past it? I didn't. Not completely. Jacob finally turned to face her. But I learned to take the good moments anyway. Even when I was scared. Even when I was waiting for everything to fall apart. His eyes held hers. Because the alternative is worse. Spending your whole life afraid to feel anything just in case it hurts later. Clara absorbed his words. Let them settle into the hollow place inside her. I've been afraid for so long. The admission came out barely above a whisper. Since William died. Maybe before that. I don't remember what it feels like to not be afraid. Then let me remind you. Jacob's hand came up to cup her face. His palm was warm against her cold skin. His eyes searched hers, asking permission. Clara answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative. Two wounded people reaching for each other across a gulf of grief and fear. But underneath the gentleness, Clara felt something else: hope. When they finally pulled apart, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Clara Mercer." "I know." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I love you too." "Yeah. Yeah." Jacob's answering smile was brighter than the rising sun. But the moment couldn't last. A rider appeared on the road from town, moving fast. Clara's heart stuttered with old fear before she recognized Hank's familiar silhouette. "Boss." Hank reined in his horse, barely stopping before he started talking. "You need to come back to town, now." "What's wrong?" Jacob's hand found Clara's, holding tight. "It's Cobb." Hank's face was grim. "He's gone. Took everything he could carry and disappeared in the night. But that ain't the worst part." Clara's stomach dropped. "What's the worst part?" "He left something behind. A letter for the council." Hank's eyes met Clara's. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. He's claiming he's got proof your husband was a criminal. That those twins ain't legitimate heirs to nothing because William Mercer was a fraud and a thief." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "That's not possible." Her voice sounded far away. "William was a businessman. Import trade. I don't know what's true and what ain't." Hank shook his head. "But Cobb's letter is all over town. People are talking. Some of them are starting to believe it." Clara turned to Jacob, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. "What do we do?" "We find the truth." Jacob's voice was steady, even as his grip on her hand tightened. "Whatever William was or wasn't, we find out. And then we face it. Together. Always." They rode back to town as the sun finished rising. The letter was worse than Clara had imagined. Jeremiah Cobb had spent weeks preparing his final weapon. Pages of documentation, some real, some likely forged, painting a picture of William Mercer as a confidence man who'd swindled investors across 3 states before his luck ran out in St. Louis. The railroad accident hadn't been an accident at all, Cobb claimed. It had been an escape attempt gone wrong. William had been fleeing creditors, angry partners, possibly the law itself. And Clara, according to Cobb's version, had known everything. Had been William's partner in crime. Had come to Dusty Creek to start a new scheme using her babies as props to generate sympathy. "This is insane." Clara stared at the papers spread across Ruth's kitchen table. "None of this is true. He was a good man. He made mistakes, yes, but he wasn't a criminal." "You sure about that?" Jacob's voice was gentle. "Careful." Clara's head snapped up. "What? I'm not saying I believe Cobb." Jacob held up his hands. "But Clara, you told me yourself that William kept secrets. He lied about having a brother. What else might he have lied about?" The question hit Clara like a blow. She wanted to deny it, to insist that William had been exactly who she'd believed him to be. But the truth was, she didn't know anymore. The man she'd married had kept parts of himself hidden. What else might be lurking in those shadows? "I need to find out." Clara's voice shook. "I need to know what's real, and what Cobb made up." "How?" Ruth spoke up from the stove where she'd been pretending not to listen. "William's dead. His records were sold off with everything else. Where would you even start?" "St. Louis." Clara's mind was racing now. "I still have contacts there. People who knew William knew his business. If he was really doing what Cobb claims, someone would know." "That's a 2-week journey." Jacob's brow furrowed. "Maybe more in winter. You can't take the twins on a trip like that." "Then I go alone." "Clara." "Jacob, listen to me." She turned to face him fully. "As long as these accusations hang over me, everything we built is at risk. The investigation into Cobb, the support from the ranchers, my reputation, all of it. People are already starting to doubt. I can see it in their eyes." She gestured at the window at the town beyond. "I can't spend the rest of my life with this shadow over me. Over my children. I have to know the truth even if it's ugly. even if it proves William was exactly what Cobb says he was. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Clara could see him wrestling with the decision, wanting to protect her, knowing he couldn't. "I'll go with you." "You can't. The ranch—" "Hank can manage for a few weeks. Miguel's been wanting more responsibility." Jacob's jaw set. "I'm not letting you face this alone. The twins will stay with me." Ruth's voice brooked no argument. "Those babies have been half mine since you walked through my door. They'll be fine." Clara looked between them, at Jacob's determined face, at Ruth's fierce love. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Ruth crossed to her, placed both hands on Clara's shoulders. "Go find your truth, child. Whatever it is, we'll be here when you get back." Clara felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate. "Both of you, for everything. Thank us by coming home safe." Ruth pulled her into a fierce embrace. "And by figuring out how to make that son of a Cobb pay for what he's done. That's definitely on the list." They left 3 days later. Clara spent every moment she could with the twins, memorizing their faces, their sounds, their smells. Samuel had started making babbling noises that sounded almost like words. Rose had learned to clap her hands. They were growing so fast, changing every day. 2 weeks felt like forever. "They'll be fine." Ruth said it every time she caught Clara hovering over the basket. "I raised 2 children of my own, you know, plus half the neighborhood's kids when their parents needed help." "I know. You're their mother. Of course it's hard." Ruth's voice softened. "But you're doing this for them, so they can grow up with their heads high without lies hanging over them." Clara nodded. Ruth was right. She knew Ruth was right. It didn't make leaving any easier. The journey to St. Louis was brutal. Winter storms delayed them twice. A broken wagon wheel cost them 3 days. They slept in roadside inns that ranged from tolerable to terrible, always moving, always pushing forward. But they talked. In the long hours on the road, in the quiet evenings by strange fireplaces, Clara and Jacob talked about everything. Their childhoods, their marriages, their losses, their hopes, their fears. Clara learned that Jacob's father had been a hard man, demanding and distant. That Jacob had spent his whole life trying to earn approval that never came. That when his father finally died, Jacob had felt relief alongside the grief and had been ashamed of that relief ever since. Jacob learned that Clara's mother had died when she was 12. That her father had remarried a woman who resented Clara's existence. That Clara had married William partly for love, but also partly to escape. That she'd never quite forgiven herself for that. "We're a pair, aren't we?" Jacob said one night as they sat by the fire in a small inn outside Kansas City. "Both of us carrying around guilt for things we couldn't control. Maybe that's why we found each other." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "Broken things recognizing broken things." "I don't think you're broken." Jacob's arm came around her. "I think you're surviving. There's a difference." Clara considered that. "What's the difference?" "Broken things can't be fixed. Surviving things are still growing." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You're still growing, Clara. Every day you're becoming more of who you were meant to be." Clara closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was just becoming. St. Louis rose out of the frozen landscape like a ghost from Clara's past. She'd left this city 6 months ago with nothing but her babies and a desperate hope. Now she was returning with a new life waiting for her back in Wyoming, a man who loved her, a community that had stood up for her. But first, she needed answers. Their first stop was the law office of Harold Pemberton, the attorney who'd handled William's estate. Clara had dealt with him briefly after William's death, a harried man more interested in collecting his fees than in helping a grieving widow. "Mrs. Mercer." Pemberton looked up from his desk with obvious surprise. "I didn't expect to see you again. I didn't expect to be back." Clara sat in the chair across from him without waiting to be invited. "I need information about my husband's business dealings. I'm afraid those records were sold with the rest of the estate." "I'm not looking for records." Clara leaned forward. "I'm looking for truth. There are accusations being made against William, against me. I need to know if they have any basis in fact." Pemberton's face went carefully neutral. "What kind of accusations? Fraud, theft, criminal activity?" Clara watched his expression closely. "A man named Jeremiah Cobb claims William was running confidence schemes across 3 states. Something flickered in Pemberton's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "Mr. Pemberton," Clara's voice hardened. "I can see that name means something to you. Tell me what you know." "I don't—" "You handled my husband's estate. You saw his records, his correspondences, his debts. If there was anything criminal in William's history, you would have found it." Clara placed her hands on his desk. "Tell me the truth, now, or I'll find someone else who will, and then I'll come back here with the authorities and ask why you covered it up." Pemberton's face went pale. "Mrs. Mercer, please. You don't understand." "Then help me understand." The attorney was silent for a long moment. Clara could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "There was an investigation." His voice dropped low. "A few years ago, before you were married, William was questioned about some investment schemes that went bad. Investors lost money. There were accusations of fraud." Clara's heart sank. "Was he guilty?" "The investigation was dropped. No charges were ever filed." Pemberton spread his hands. "That's all I know for certain. But Mrs. Mercer, you should know. The man who led that investigation, the one who pushed hardest for charges, his name was Jeremiah Cobb." Clara felt the floor drop away beneath her. "Cobb." Jacob's voice was sharp. "The same Cobb who's been tormenting her in Wyoming. His family had invested heavily in one of William's ventures, lost nearly everything when it failed." Pemberton looked between them. "I don't know if William was guilty or innocent, but I know Jeremiah Cobb has been nursing a grudge against the Mercer name for years." Clara sank back into her chair. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was uglier than she'd imagined. "So, when I answered Cobb's advertisement," she said slowly, "he already knew who I was." "It's possible." Pemberton's voice was careful. "If he recognized the name, if he'd been tracking William's widow—" "He set me up." Clara's voice went cold with fury. "From the very beginning, he brought me to Dusty Creek specifically to destroy me, to get revenge on a dead man by ruining his wife and children." "Clara." Jacob's hand found her shoulder. "We don't know that for certain." "Don't we?" She looked up at him. "Think about it. The public rejection, the escalating attacks, the accusations. He's been playing a long game, Jacob, using me as a punching bag for a grudge that has nothing to do with anything I've actually done." Jacob's face darkened with understanding and anger. "Then we take this back to Wyoming." His voice was tight. "Show everyone what Cobb really is. A vindictive man attacking a widow because her dead husband cost him money." "It's more complicated than that." Clara's mind was racing. "If William really was involved in fraud, even if he was never charged, that's ammunition Cobb can use. The accusations aren't completely baseless. That's what makes them so dangerous." "So what do we do?" Clara stood. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was steady. "We find out the whole truth. Every detail, every fact." She met Jacob's eyes. "And then we use it. Not to hide what William did, but to show exactly what Cobb is doing. Using a dead man's mistakes to justify destroying an innocent woman." She turned back to Pemberton. "I need the names of everyone involved in that original investigation. Investors, witnesses, anyone who knew William during that time. Can you get them for me? Pemberton hesitated, then nodded slowly. It'll take a few days. But yes, I can get them. Then get them. Clara headed for the door, then paused. And Mr. Pemberton, if I find out you've warned Cobb about this conversation, I'll make sure everyone knows you helped cover up a fraud investigation. Are we clear? Pemberton's face went gray. Perfectly clear, Mrs. Mercer. Good. Clara walked out of the office with Jacob beside her, her mind already spinning with plans and possibilities. The truth was worse than she'd hoped. William had been involved in something shady, even if he'd never been charged. That would hurt. But it also gave her a weapon, because now she understood exactly what Jeremiah Cobb was and why he'd targeted her, and she was going to make him pay. The next week was a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and research. Clara tracked down 3 of William's former investors. 2 refused to speak with her. The third, an elderly man named George Hartwell, invited her into his home and told her everything. Your husband wasn't a bad man. Hartwell's voice was reedy with age. He was ambitious, too ambitious. He made promises he couldn't keep, took risks that didn't pay off. When the investments failed, people got hurt. Was it fraud? Clara forced herself to ask. That depends on how you define the word. Hartwell sighed. Did William set out to cheat people? I don't think so. Did he misrepresent the risks, exaggerate the potential returns, keep investing even when he should have known it was failing? Yes. Probably. Clara absorbed this. And Cobb. Jeremiah was one of the biggest investors. His family's money mostly. When it all collapsed, he lost everything. Hartwell's eyes grew distant. He blamed William, swore he'd make him pay. When the investigation fizzled out, when there weren't enough evidence for charges, Jeremiah was furious. Said the system had failed him. So he took matters into his own hands. He tried. Hartwell looked at her with something like pity. But William was already gone by then. Moved away, started over. I heard he married, had children. His gaze sharpened. You're the wife, aren't you? The one with the twins? Yes. I'm sorry. Hartwell's voice was genuine. For what you've been through. For what's still coming. Jeremiah Cobb doesn't forgive. Doesn't forget. He'll keep coming after you until one of you is destroyed. Clara stood. Then I'll have to make sure it's not me. She gathered every piece of information she could find. Letters, documents, testimonies from people who'd known William, who'd dealt with Cobb, who could speak to the history between them. By the time she and Jacob boarded the train back to Wyoming, Clara had enough evidence to tell a very different story than the one Cobb had been spreading. Not a story of a criminal's widow continuing his schemes. A story of a grieving man using his power to persecute an innocent woman because he couldn't punish the man who'd actually wronged him. Will it be enough? Jacob asked as the train pulled out of the station. I don't know. Clara watched the city disappear behind them. But it's the truth. And truth has a power of its own. Jacob took her hand. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. I know. She closed her eyes. That's the only reason I'm not terrified. You're allowed to be terrified. I know that too. A small smile curved her lips. But I'm choosing to be brave instead. Jacob pressed a kiss to her hair. That's my girl. They arrived back in Dusty Creek on a bitter February evening, the wind howling down from the mountains, like it wanted to drive them back. Ruth was waiting at the boarding house, the twins in her arms. Clara ran the last 20 feet, grabbed her babies, and burst into tears. Mama's here. She held them close, breathing in their scent, feeling their weight in her arms. Mama's home. I'm never leaving again. I promise. Never again. Samuel gurgled happily. Rose grabbed a fistful of Clara's hair and yanked. They missed you. Ruth's eyes were suspiciously bright. Cried for 3 days after you left. But they're fine. strong and healthy and eating enough for 4 babies. Thank you. Clara looked up at the woman who'd become her mother. Ruth, I can't ever repay. Hush. Ruth waved off the gratitude. Your family. That's what family does. She peered at Clara's face. You found what you were looking for. I found the truth. Clara shifted the babies. It's complicated. William wasn't innocent, but he wasn't what Cobb claimed either. And Cobb... She took a breath. Cobb's been planning this for years. His whole attack on me, it was never about what I did. It was about revenge on a dead man. Ruth's expression hardened. Then it's time the whole town knew that. Yes. Clara looked toward the town, toward the people who'd believed in her, toward the fight that was still waiting. It is. The next morning, Clara called a meeting of her own. Not at the saloon or the town hall. At the church. On a Sunday. Right after services. Reverend Patterson tried to object. Clara stared him down until he gave in. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Margaret Dawson appeared at Clara's elbow as people filed into the pews. Demanding the whole congregation hear you out. I learned from the best. Clara managed a weak smile. You told me to fight fire with fire. This is me doing that. I'm proud of you. Margaret squeezed her arm. Whatever happens next, know that. Clara nodded, drew a deep breath, and walked to the front of the church. Thank you for staying. Her voice carried clearly through the space. I know this is unusual. I know some of you have heard things about me, about my husband, that have made you question everything you believed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara pushed on. I went to St. Louis last week. I found the truth about William Mercer, about Jeremiah Cobb, about why I'm really standing here today. She paused. It's not a pretty story, but it's the real one. And you deserve to hear it. She told them everything. William's failed investments, the people who'd lost money, the investigation that never led to charges, and Jeremiah Cobb, young and furious, swearing revenge on a man who'd cost him his family's fortune. When I answered Cobb's advertisement, Clara continued, he already knew exactly who I was. He'd been waiting for years for a chance to punish William. When William died before Cobb could get to him, he transferred that hatred to me. She let that sink in. Every attack, the public rejection, the threats, the fire, the false brother, the accusations. It was never about anything I did. It was about one man's obsession with destroying someone connected to the person who'd wronged him. The church was silent. Clara could feel the weight of their attention, their judgment, their doubt. I'm not asking you to forgive my husband for his mistakes. I'm not asking you to trust me without reason. She straightened her spine. I'm asking you to see the truth. That Jeremiah Cobb used all of us, me, Jacob, this whole community, as pawns in a game of revenge. That he lied, cheated, and burned his way through our lives because he couldn't let go of the past. She looked around the room, meeting eyes one by one. I came to Dusty Creek looking for a fresh start. I found something better. I found people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. Her voice cracked. I found family. Ruth stood in the back, tears streaming down her face. Jacob sat in the front row, his eyes fierce with pride. The ranchers, the women, the children she'd helped without thinking, they were all there, all watching. So I'm asking you one more time, not to believe me blindly, but to see me for who I really am. A woman who made mistakes, who married a man with secrets, who came here desperate and broken, and somehow found the strength to keep going. Clara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I'm asking you to let me stay, to let me be part of this community, to let me raise my children here surrounded by people who know my story, the real story, and accept me anyway. She stopped, waited. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Henry Morrison stood up. I've known Jeremiah Cobb my whole life. His voice was gruff. Never trusted him. Always knew there was something rotten underneath that smile. He looked at Clara. "You've got my support, Mrs. Mercer. Now and always." Another person stood, then another. One by one they rose from their pews, not applauding, not cheering, but standing, bearing witness. Clara felt Jacob's hand slide into hers. "You did it." His voice was rough with emotion.